Somewhere in your garden, right now, something is moving so slowly you'd swear it wasn't moving at all. It leaves a silver trail across the stone path. It hides beneath the damp underside of a leaf. And if you're like most gardeners on earth, your first instinct when you see it is disgust, followed almost immediately by the urge to destroy it. The garden slug. For generations, this creature has been public enemy number one in backyards, allotments, and farms around the world. We've thrown salt on them. We've drowned them in beer traps. We've hunted them down with flashlights at midnight, picking them off leaf by leaf like some slow-motion war against an invading army. Entire industries have been built around killing them: pellets, sprays, copper tape, barriers of crushed eggshell. But what if I told you that almost everything you believe about the garden slug is incomplete? That this creature, so reviled, so mocked, so squished without a second thought, is quietly performing one of the most important ecological jobs in your entire garden ecosystem? What if the slug isn't your enemy at all, but one of your garden's hardest working, most underappreciated allies? Stick with me. By the end of this video, you may never look at a slug the same way again. Let's be fair. Let's start with why people hate slugs in the first place, because the hatred isn't irrational, it's built on real, frustrating experience. You plant a row of tender lettuce seedlings. You water them, you nurture them, you check on them every morning with that particular hope only gardeners understand. And then one night they vanish. Not eaten by a rabbit, not trampled, just gone, reduced to ragged stumps, with nothing but a telltale silvery trail left behind as the only clue to the culprit. Slugs are, without question, capable of causing real damage. They have a rasping tongue called a radula, covered in thousands of microscopic tooth-like structures, which they use to scrape away at soft plant tissue. Seedlings, in particular, are vulnerable, because slugs are drawn to the tender, high-moisture growth that young plants offer. A slug population left unchecked in a vegetable patch can absolutely devastate a crop of beans, cabbages, or hostas. This is why gardening forums are full of war stories. This is why garden centers sell shelves of slug pellets. This is why an entire cultural mythology has grown up around the slug as villain, slow-moving, slimy, and seemingly put on this earth for the sole purpose of ruining your carefully tended flower beds. And I want to be honest with you, nothing in this video is going to tell you that slugs never cause damage. They can, and they do, especially in certain conditions: wet springs, dense seedling beds, gardens with no natural predators around to keep populations in check. But here's where the story gets interesting. Because the villain narrative, the one we've all absorbed without question, misses almost everything else the slug is doing while we're not looking. It misses the vast majority of a slug's actual diet. It misses the role slugs play in one of the most fundamental processes on Earth. And it misses just how essential they are to the health of the very soil your garden depends on. Here's a fact that surprises almost everyone: the overwhelming majority of what a slug eats in your garden is not your living plants. It's dead ones. Slugs are what ecologists call detritivores, organisms that feed primarily on decaying organic matter. Fallen leaves, rotting fruit, decomposing stems, dead wood, fungi, even the droppings of other animals. In fact, studies on slug diets have consistently found that the vast bulk of slug feeding activity in gardens and woodlands targets decaying plant material rather than living, healthy tissue. Think about your garden for a moment. Every autumn, leaves fall. Every season, plants die back, stems collapse, flowers wither and drop to the soil. If nothing consumed that material, your garden would slowly bury itself in a thickening layer of dead plant matter, year after year, decade after decade. Something has to break that material down. Something has to take dead organic matter and begin the process of turning it back into the raw nutrients that living plants can use again. And slugs are one of the primary workers on that job. This is the detail almost nobody knows: slugs are, in essence, one of your garden's sanitation crew. They are recyclers. Every night, while you sleep, slugs are out there quietly consuming the dead leaves, the rotting fruit that fell from your apple tree, the collapsed stems of last season's tomato plants. They're not typically choosing your healthy, vigorous, mature plants as their first meal of choice. Those plants, in general, have natural defenses, tougher tissue, and chemical deterrents that make them less appealing. Decaying matter, by contrast, is soft, easy to process, and abundant. There's actually a reason slugs disproportionately target seedlings rather than mature plants, and it's not because slugs have a grudge against your gardening effort. Seedlings simply lack the chemical and physical defenses that older plants build up over time. They're the exception that proves the rule, not evidence that slugs are indiscriminate plant killers. To understand why this matters, we need to zoom out and talk about decomposition itself, because it is one of the most underrated processes on the entire planet. Every ecosystem on Earth runs on a cycle. Plants grow by pulling nutrients from the soil, capturing energy from sunlight, and building their bodies out of that captured energy. Animals eat plants, or eat other animals, and that energy moves up the food chain. But eventually, everything dies. Every leaf, every log, every creature. And when it does, all of the nutrients locked up inside that organism, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the carbon, the calcium, become unavailable to the rest of the ecosystem unless something breaks that material back down. This is decomposition. And without it, the entire system would grind to a halt. Nutrients would stay locked inside dead material forever. Soil would become depleted. New plant growth would slow and eventually stop entirely, because there would be nothing left in circulation to fuel it. Decomposition is handled by an enormous, largely invisible workforce: bacteria, fungi, earthworms, lice, beetles, and yes, slugs. Each of these organisms plays a slightly different role. Fungi and bacteria handle the microscopic, chemical breakdown. Larger organisms like slugs and earthworms handle what's called physical decomposition, literally breaking large pieces of dead material into smaller pieces, increasing the surface area available for those microscopic decomposers to finish the job. This is a critical detail, so let's slow down on it. When a slug eats a decaying leaf, it isn't just disposing of it. It's chewing that leaf into smaller fragments, and as those fragments pass through the slug's digestive system, they come out the other end already partially broken down, already colonized with digestive bacteria, already in a form that soil microorganisms can process far more quickly than they could have processed the whole intact leaf. In other words, slugs pre-process your garden's dead material, accelerating the entire nutrient cycle. They are, quite literally, speeding up the return of nutrients back into your soil, which is the same soil feeding your flowers, your vegetables, your shrubs, and your trees. Let's go even deeper, because the story doesn't stop at decomposition. Soil health is, arguably, the single most important factor in whether a garden thrives or struggles. Healthy soil is alive, teeming with billions of microorganisms per teaspoon, threaded through with fungal networks, aerated by the tunneling of worms and insects, structured in a way that lets water penetrate rather than run off, and holds moisture rather than either flooding or drying out. Slugs contribute to this living soil system in a way most gardeners never consider. As slugs move through leaf litter and soil, consuming decaying matter, their waste, yes, their droppings, becomes a nutrient-rich addition to the soil itself. Slug excrement is packed with partially digested organic material, along with the bacteria that colonized it during digestion. This waste becomes an immediate food source for soil bacteria and fungi, further accelerating the breakdown of nutrients into forms plant roots can absorb. There's also a quieter, less obvious contribution. Slugs, in the process of moving through soil and leaf litter, help aerate and mix the top layer of soil, much like earthworms do, albeit on a smaller scale. This mixing helps distribute organic matter more evenly, preventing thick, undecomposed mats of leaves from smothering the soil surface and blocking oxygen and water from reaching plant roots below. And here's something that connects directly back to that fungal network I mentioned. Healthy soil relies heavily on mycorrhizal fungi, fungal networks that form symbiotic relationships with plant roots, helping plants absorb water and nutrients in exchange for sugars. Some research on slugs and fungi has found that slugs play a role in spreading fungal spores as they move through the garden, inadvertently seeding new areas with the very fungal partners that help your plants thrive. A slow-moving creature, spreading the literal seeds of soil health across your garden floor, one silver trail at a time. Now let's talk about something else that rarely gets mentioned in the kill all slugs conversation: what eats the slug. Slugs are a critical food source for an enormous range of garden wildlife. Hedgehogs, one of the most beloved and increasingly rare garden visitors in places like the UK, rely heavily on slugs and snails as a primary part of their diet. Ground beetles, a natural pest control ally that also eats aphids and other genuinely damaging insects, feed on slugs and slug eggs. Toads and frogs, especially in damp garden corners, consume slugs as a dietary staple. Certain birds, particularly thrushes, are famous for their slug and snail hunting behavior. The classic image of a thrush smashing a snail shell against a stone is a direct example of this predator-prey relationship in action. Even some species of beetle larvae specialize almost exclusively in hunting slug eggs and juveniles underground. This means that when you eliminate slugs from your garden entirely, through pellets, through relentless hand-picking, through chemical barriers, you are not just removing a single unwanted species. You are pulling a support beam out from underneath an entire food web. Fewer slugs means less food for hedgehogs, fewer ground beetles sticking around, fewer toads finding your garden worth living in. And here's the deeper irony: many of the predators that eat slugs, ground beetles, toads, birds, also eat the insects that cause the damage gardeners actually fear most: aphids, caterpillars, and other genuinely destructive pests. So when you use broad-spectrum slug pellets or aggressively eliminate slug populations, you're often damaging the very predator network that would otherwise be helping control your other pest problems for free. This is the hidden cost of the kill every slug you see mentality. It isn't just about the slug. It ripples outward through the entire garden ecosystem. Let's take a brief detour, because we can't talk about slugs without talking about the thing everyone finds most repulsive: the slime. That trail of mucus a slug leaves behind isn't just gross residue. It's an extraordinary biological substance doing multiple jobs at once. Slug mucus is hygroscopic, meaning it absorbs and holds onto water, which helps the slug retain moisture and avoid drying out, a critical survival need for a soft-bodied creature with no shell for protection. The slime also reduces friction, allowing the slug to glide smoothly over rough surfaces, and in some cases can even allow a slug to travel upside down or across surfaces like the edge of a razor blade without injury, because the mucus acts as a protective cushioning layer. There's more. Slug mucus contains proteins and compounds that researchers have studied for potential applications in fields like medical adhesives and wound care, inspired by the way slug slime can bond to wet, moving surfaces, something traditional surgical adhesives struggle to do. A team of engineers has even used slug mucus as biological inspiration for designing new types of medical glue meant to work on the wet, flexible surfaces inside the human body. So even the substance most associated with the slug's ick factor turns out to be a marvel of natural engineering, one that scientists are actively trying to learn from and replicate. One more crucial piece of the puzzle: not every slug species behaves the same way, and lumping them all together is part of why the reputation is so skewed. There are thousands of slug species worldwide, and their diets and behaviors vary considerably. Some species are almost entirely detritivores, focused on decaying material and rarely touching living plants at all. Others are more opportunistic, and will happily nibble on seedlings when given the chance. And remarkably, some slug species are actually predatory, hunting and consuming other slugs, snails, and even earthworms. The leopard slug is a great example, a large, strikingly patterned species that primarily feeds on decaying matter and fungi, and which will also prey on other slug species, including some of the ones more likely to damage garden plants. In other words, some slugs in your garden may actually be working against the slugs causing you trouble, without you ever realizing a miniature predator-prey drama is unfolding in your flower bed after dark. This diversity matters because it means blanket slug elimination. Treating every single slug as an equal threat throws out an enormous amount of ecological nuance. You may be killing off detritivores and predatory slugs that were never bothering your lettuce in the first place, while doing nothing to address the specific conditions that favor the smaller number of species actually causing damage. Here's something that flips the whole conversation on its head. A garden with an extremely low slug population isn't necessarily a healthier garden. In many cases, it's a warning sign. Slug populations tend to explode in gardens that are ecologically imbalanced, gardens where natural predators have been driven out by pesticide use, where biodiversity has been reduced to a handful of ornamental plants with no supporting habitat, or where conditions like excess moisture and lack of natural ground cover create a perfect breeding ground with nothing to keep numbers in check. In a balanced garden ecosystem, one with hedgehogs, ground beetles, birds, and healthy soil biology, slug populations tend to stay at a manageable level naturally. The predators eat enough slugs to prevent population explosions, while the slugs that remain continue quietly doing their decomposition work without ever reaching numbers high enough to seriously threaten your plants. This reframes the entire problem. A slug infestation isn't really a too many slugs problem in isolation. It's usually a symptom of a garden that has lost its natural checks and balances. And the common response, reaching for chemical slug pellets, often makes the underlying imbalance worse, not better, by further harming the birds, beetles, and other creatures that would otherwise be controlling slug numbers for you. So what does this mean practically? If slugs are doing valuable work, does that mean you should just let them destroy your vegetable garden? Not at all. The goal isn't zero intervention, it's balance, and working with the ecosystem rather than declaring chemical war on it. Encouraging natural predators is one of the most effective long-term strategies. A small pond or damp shaded corner can attract toads and frogs. Leaving a pile of logs or leaf litter in an out-of-the-way corner gives ground beetles and hedgehogs shelter. Reducing or eliminating pesticide use allows these predator populations to recover and do their job. Protecting vulnerable seedlings specifically, rather than treating the whole garden as a battlefield, is far more effective than blanket elimination. Physical barriers around young, tender plants, copper tape, crushed eggshell, or simply starting seedlings indoors until they're more established and less vulnerable, target the actual problem without collateral damage to the detritivores and predators doing beneficial work elsewhere in the garden. Mulching thoughtfully also matters. Since slugs are drawn to damp, decaying material, keeping mulch away from direct contact with the stems of vulnerable young plants, while still maintaining healthy compost and leaf litter elsewhere in the garden, lets you keep the decomposition benefits without concentrating slug activity exactly where your seedlings are most at risk. And perhaps most importantly, tolerance. A few nibbled leaves on a mature, established plant is rarely a real problem. It's a sign of a functioning ecosystem, not a failing garden. The instinct to eliminate every single slug on site is, in most cases, disproportionate to the actual threat they pose, especially once plants are past the vulnerable seedling stage. Step back for a moment and consider what this whole story really represents. The garden slug is a small, unglamorous example of something much bigger, the way we, as humans, tend to judge nature through an incredibly narrow lens. We see an organism do something inconvenient to us, one time, in one context, and we build an entire mythology of villainy around it, without ever asking what else that organism might be doing when we're not looking. The slug's slow, slimy, unglamorous existence hides an entire hidden job description: recycler, soil builder, fungal spore spreader, food source for beloved garden wildlife, and quiet participant in one of the most fundamental processes that keeps every ecosystem on this planet functioning. It has been doing this work for hundreds of millions of years. Slugs and their relatives are part of an evolutionary lineage that predates dinosaurs, long before humans ever planted a single row of lettuce to be upset about. Next time you're out in the garden at dusk and you see that slow-moving shape gliding along a damp leaf, leaving its silver trail behind, maybe pause, just for a second, before reaching for the pellets. You might be looking at one of your garden's hardest working, most misunderstood employees. Not an enemy to be eliminated, but a quiet, essential thread in the web of life that makes your garden, and every garden, actually work. If this video changed the way you'll look at your garden, even a little, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear whether you've had your own slug battles, or whether you've noticed the quieter work they do. And if you want more videos exploring the hidden lives of the creatures we misunderstand, make sure to subscribe, because nature is full of stories like this one, small, slow, overlooked, and far more remarkable than we ever give them credit for. Thanks for watching.